Hello and welcome to another edition, episode number 10 of the Mike Epstein Hitting Podcast. We're already on episode number 10. Hard to believe. We're working towards 1,000. I'm Jim. Joining me as always is my friend, professional hitting instructor, renowned hitting coach, and co-host Jake Epstein. Jake, how are you? Happy Father's Day, by the way.
Happy Father's Day. Thank you. I'm trying to do the math on 1,000 episodes.
Yes.
A week, there's 52 weeks in a year. Is that 20 more years?
About 20
more years. 20 more. All right. We got a good start going. Who knows what it'll be like in 20 years? Maybe we just have to think about a podcast and it'll appear automatically in our contact lens.
Who would have thought 20 years ago that we'd have so much virtual reality? And here we are.
Yeah.
We're surrounded by virtual reality and all this new technology. Hey, you know what? I mean, we could start doing someday 2 days a week, so then we get to 1,000 even quicker.
We could quicken it up. We need some more. We'll get a bunch more topics from our listeners. We got some good ones coming in already, which is good.
We do. Next week we are doing another hitter breakdown, a mechanical breakdown. We're supposed to do that today. That's a programming note I want to let everybody know about. We're going to push that back to next week because today we're doing our History Hitting Book Part 2. Last week we covered 1900 to 1990. A lot of good stuff in there. And today we're covering the last 30 years of hitting. Before we do that, though, I want to pass along a little note that I found this week. I found it on Facebook, actually, from what's called Baseballer. I'm sure you've heard of it. Mm-hmm. And it was about, you live in Denver, Colorado, and that's where you and I first worked together and met. And it was about Larry Walker. I'm sure you know a lot about Larry. Mm-hmm. This just goes to show baseball players and their OCD. Nothing wrong with that. You and I both have it, I'm sure.
Nope.
Larry Walker, this is from Baseballer again on Facebook. He was obsessed with the number 3. He set his alarm for 33 minutes past the hour, took batting practice swings in multiples of 3. Not sure really what that means. Wore number 33 and was married on November 3rd at 3:33 p.m. Fun little Larry Walker fact.
Did he get 3,000 hits, Walker?
I don't know, but I can tell you. I do have a note here that he did win the batting title, late '90s, a couple of times. I was thinking about him last night too, with Larry Walker. He was kind of under the radar a little bit, kind of like an under the radar type star behind. I mean, Dante Bichette was a little bit like that as well. But Larry Walker especially was that. Maybe it was just because it was the East Coast, West Coast bias, and he was right there in the Mountain West, kind of the middle of the country. But he was kind of an underrated star. He reminds me a little bit, I'm not comping him, but he reminds me of how he's underrated, of a star today who I think is a little bit underrated, but he's a 3-time All-Star, and Edwin Encarnacion. Not as talked about as much, but he's got some pretty good numbers there to back up a good career.
Yeah, Larry Walker was, I remember Walker when he was with the Expos, and that's probably why he's so underrated, is that's where he started his career and actually had great years, in Montreal before he signed with the Rockies. I remember my dad telling me a story because Walker was just an athlete, right? I mean, He was self-taught, he was just kind of did everything well. He had a cannon from right field. He was a great outfielder. He could run. Typical Canadian player, right-hand thrower, left-hand hitter.
Great shape. Which he was in great
shape. Which they typically get from playing hockey. Growing up playing hockey, they usually play with their right hand on top of the stick and their left hand low. So when they play baseball, it ends up being that same way. But my dad asked him, he said, one day at Coors Field, do you guess? Larry, do you guess pitches? No, Mike, I can't guess. It's too hard to guess. Can't do that. My dad says, really? He says, you just go up there and says, yeah, man, I just kind of see it and hit it. My dad says, well, what happens if the count's 2-0 and he just missed with 2 breaking balls? And Larry looked at him and says, well, I'm sitting on a fastball then. And my dad said, well, what do you think guessing is? You're sitting on a fastball. And they both laughed for 10 minutes, he said. He said the whole round of BP, every time he'd look back and just laugh, he's like, I just never thought about it that way. Guessing as looking for or sitting on, it's all kind of the same term. But that's as close. I never met Larry Walker, but that's as close as I got, I guess.
Yeah.
That story.
You mentioned hockey, by the way. I saw a picture. I had a poster back in the day in college of a hockey player who he was about to shoot the puck, and you could see his body was contorted and it was torqued, almost like a baseball player when he's loaded up. But obviously the bat was in a different slot, different place. Playing a skill sport like hockey, how much does that develop, in your opinion, your skills for baseball growing up?
Having been a competitive street hockey player during my junior high days, I can.
I was also a street hockey player as well.
Oh, good times.
I wish I played more, to be honest with you.
Yeah, it's such a great sport. I think it's an athletic sport, right? I mean, you look at hockey players; they're so much bigger than you think they are. They're big and they're strong and they're fast and they're on ice, for crying out loud.
Yeah.
Obviously the eye-hand coordination is there, but just overall athleticism. And yes, if you're trying to, and I use this analogy, somewhat frequently, but if you're trying to swing an object fast, whether it's a baseball, softball bat, a golf club, a hockey stick, if it's an axe in one of those nature games, you have to move your body in a certain way to create enough energy coming out of that object. And what you're seeing, hockey, it's very similar. They're creating separation between, their hips and their shoulders. It's just kind of an athletic move that starts the process of, creating speed out of an object. So, I think hockey players definitely have no problem hitting a golf ball. I've played with so many hockey players in Colorado because the Avalanche, those guys play a ton of golf. And they hit balls like I've never seen before. They hit golf balls, and it's just such a natural move for them, hitting, coming from hockey and then playing golf, that it's like the perfect transition.
Yeah. I'm for the record, I do wish I played more hockey growing up. At one point, I was playing both hockey and baseball. Hockey is a great sport, and I think that hockey players are some of the most skilled athletes. And there is a difference. I mean, I've said before, I think maybe I've mentioned it on this podcast before, basketball players are some of the best athletes in the world. Same thing with football players, too. But baseball players and hockey players, they're different types of athletes. They're skilled athletes. Their skill set is different, and it takes a special type skill set that is different from football and basketball to be successful in those sports. I mean, when you talk about hockey, you just mentioned how big they are, skating on ice, what they're able to do with the puck. It's crazy. And by the way, able to contort their body on skates, on ice. It's not easy. That's even hard. That's hard.
And it's cool, like to be able to debate different sports, because being athletic is different than having a skill set. Like, you have baseball players that look like they're not even athletes, right? I mean, you that was the old joke back in the day.
John Kruk said
John
that.
Kruk and guys that were just sloppy. And even today, you have guys that are sloppy that you couldn't see that guy on a basketball court. Like, there's no way that guy's going to compete on a basketball court. But you have to, and then you see guys on a basketball court, or a football player that would step in the batter's box and would have no idea how to swing that object, right, and how to use those different skills. So I think that's what makes obviously the world go round, but it's what makes baseball fun, because you can when you have freaks, right, when you have an Aaron Judge or Giancarlo Stanton that are physical tools that really you see on the gridiron all the time, as tight ends or receivers.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden they're doing something where they have to react in 0.15 seconds. It's 0.25 seconds. It's pretty amazing, when you put all of that together, that athleticism and then the ability to play the game of baseball.
Yeah. I think maybe I'm wrong, but the only football player or basketball player that's crossed over to baseball outside of Michael Jordan and had a little bit of success, whether it be in the cage, whatnot, the only guy I can think of, and there's highlights of this, was Odell Beckham Jr., who hit a couple of bombs in BP.
Did he?
A couple of years ago.
Deion Sanders did both.
Bo Jackson. Yeah.
I mean, there's a couple. Brian Jordan, I think, was another guy, but yes, for the most part, you couldn't take a guy that didn't grow up playing baseball. Yeah. Like, you could probably take a baseball player that was a really good athlete that never played football growing up, and if he's a really good athlete, you could probably have him go out there and cover a wide receiver, or make a tackle, or catch a a crossing pattern. But I don't think you could take that guy that never played baseball in his life, that was an amazing athlete on the field, and have him hit a pitch ball.
Yeah.
I think that's the difference.
Well, let's get into good stuff right there. Let's get into today's topic, our History Hitting Book Part 2. Last week we talked about 1900 to 1990. A lot of good stuff was in there. By the way, you can go back and listen to that. Apple, Google, Spotify. The podcast, by the way, good news, it's now on Pandora as well. So we're all over the place. We've got the whole world covered here. We're on TuneIn Radio, the TuneIn Radio app. And if you have any questions for us, too, be sure to email us, jimbopodcast21@gmail.com. That is jimbopodcast21@gmail.com. Jake and I on Twitter and Instagram. I'm at Jim Tara. And Mr. Epstein is at Epstein Hitting on both platforms as well. Send us your questions. We have a question that we will get to at the end of the program here. But let's start with 1990 to 2000. We're covering the last 30 years of hitting today. And it certainly has changed a lot. And we'll get to that with all the new data that's been implemented. But some of the key moments from that decade, 1990 to 2000, and boy, it was a jam-packed decade, that's for sure. It didn't lack any excitement. I'll just say that. The Blue Jays won back-to-back World Series titles in 92 and 93. There was that strike in 1994, which wiped away the World Series. And then in 1995, the Braves won it. Which is crazy, their only World Series in the 90s. With that talent and rotation and the hitters they had, it's amazing they couldn't win more championships. The Yankees began their run, though, in 1996, won 3 of the next 4 World Series. And then, of course, there was that home run chase between Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa in 1998. I have some key moments that I remember from that decade, but I just want to see what offensively and just overall what you remember from that decade, 1990 to 2000.
Yeah, I mean, that was, my childhood not childhood, but I was getting older, right? So I was in my early teens and then obviously through college. So, I remember a lot. I think the part that jumps off the page was, the Sosa McGwire, home run duel was so captivating and so fun to watch with those guys going back and forth every single day late in the season. Another portion of that decade, which is sad, is the Expos were totally dominating baseball the strike year. Yeah. Pedro Martinez was leading that staff, and they were so good. I'm sure Walker was probably there at that time, I'm thinking. Maybe Vlad Guerrero as well. But that team was so good, that Expos team, and that would have, maybe would have saved their franchise there. Who knows if they won a World Series that year. Yeah. I remember Sid Bream scoring on, I don't know if that was who hit that ball. I can see him. Brian Hunter maybe hit that ball for the Braves, and he scored, and I don't know if that put him in the World Series or the playoffs, but I remember that, and quite honestly, I remember Griffey. Griffey just totally dominated that decade, and he was so fun to watch on the field defensively. The home run derbies with his hat backwards, making the game fun, for kids out there, and playing wiffle ball as a kid and being all of those players. I was Chipper Jones one day. I would be Griffey the next day. I would be Canseco. I'd be Ricky Henderson. I don't know. That is my highlights. This is kind of my wheelhouse of when I truly watched a lot and got into baseball, as a kid.
You remembered where you were when that home run chase was going on and when McGwire broke that record. I remember I was down at the New Jersey Shore, in fact, in Ocean City, New Jersey, at our beach house.
I remember that because you were on MTV, the MTV show. What was it? The
Jersey
summer
Shore.
Jersey. No, it was before Jersey Shore. What was the original one?
Jersey Shore. Jersey Shore was a little bit before, a little bit after this time.
It was a little bit after there. Yeah. No, I do too. I mean, I remember sitting. I was in Missouri when it was happening, right? So I was in Columbia, and it's St. Louis is right there, and we would have the game on when we were practicing at the stadium. We would have the radio coming out of the speakers so we could listen to the games every afternoon and evening when we were out there, working. It was so awesome.
Were you talking about Real Housewives of New Jersey?
No. I wouldn't go that far. I'm trying to think of what it was called. It was like the first MTV Spring Break, summer something.
MTV Spring Break, maybe.
Probably Spring Break. Yes, that's probably what it was. Yeah. I think you're on it anyway. Well, but Jersey Shore would be better for you anyway.
Well, the Joe Buck's call too was tremendous. I know a lot of people who are listening probably will turn this off now that I complimented Joe Buck, but his call of that actually his call of the 70th home run was tremendous. But you do remember where you were during, that home run chase. I think couple of key moments for me. The Yankees, when they won the World Series in 1999, beating the Braves. My dad was a Yankees fan, for those who don't know, and I went to Game 4 of the World Series the night Roger Clemens pitched. And I still remember to this day, we were sitting in the upper deck, and I remember vividly him coming off to a standing ovation after pitching, I think it was 6 innings maybe. Fast forward now, however many years later, and here I am working for the Blue Jays, and Casey Clemens was in our organization, and he was with us on the Florida operations end of things, and I got to meet Roger Clemens, and I told him that story. So that's one
cool.
thing that really sticks out to me as one of the moments in my head, the top moments of the decade. Me, of course, not being a Yankee fan, just overall. The one weird thing too, we talked about Tony Gwynn last week. The one thing that sticks out with him was that home run he hit in the '98 World Series at Yankee Stadium, and he hit it off the facing of the third deck. I mean, it was an absolute bullet.
Yes.
So I remember that, which, whatever, kind of weird. And, of course, I remember the home run chase. Now, looking at the players, you mentioned Ken Griffey Jr. was coming up at that time. The careers of Manny Ramirez, Derek Jeter, they were starting to take shape. Cal Ripken, Tony Gwynn, they were starting to wind down. And Larry Walker, Dante Bichette, they were kind of mixed in there as well. Chipper Jones, Ken Griffey Jr., their careers were starting to take shape as well. Who was your favorite hitter of that decade?
My favorite player, and I mentioned this before, was Jose Canseco.
Yes.
He was just so dynamic, coming into the late 80s. I'm trying to think, God, he probably came in 86, 87, so by the early 90s, he was a monster. So I would say, the early 90s would have still been Canseco. In terms of, Griffey was so fun to watch. So Griffey's definitely there. And it was a weird time for hitting because, you have this changing of the guards with players coming into the league that, Griffey was a guy who hit a lot of home runs and he wasn't a huge guy. Mm-hmm. And you had McGuire and you had Canseco and you had like Albert Bell, late 80s, that were really kind of, getting into the home run stuff again. But if you look back at their actual swings, they all swung up quite a bit. And then you look at the Ken Griffey Jr., and I'm sure you hit off of this, the Griffey T that had the blue bars that went straight down.
Right.
At like a 35-degree angle. So you had to get your bat in between those bars and then swing all the way down towards your front foot. Yeah. And that was the Griffey T. And so you had this dynamic where there wasn't video. There wasn't video all the time. There wasn't slow motion video.
Right.
And so Griffey thought he was swinging straight down at the ball like that, when in fact he didn't at all. And so you had these conflicting arguments that kind of went back and forth where I believe McGuire was the same way. Yeah, you have to swing straight down on the ball. And here's a guy that swung up at like 30 degrees, dropped his barrel, and hit the biggest moonshots you've ever seen before.
Yeah.
So it was kind of an interesting time. The late 90s, we started to get into more video, and that's when my dad started to come out with his teaching drills, the end of that decade. And sure enough, it was, what my dad titled it, do we teach what we really see? Mm-hmm. Like, we see these games all the time. Are we really teaching what these players are doing? And, that was kind of towards the latter part of that decade.
Yeah. You mentioned you kind of touched on it there, when the swing started to change. I just want to pass along some statistics to you here. From 1990 to 2000. Tony Gwynn led the league in hitting 3 times. Mark McGuire led the league in home runs 4 times, 96 to 99. We had a variety of RBI leaders, from Cecil Fielder to Dante Bichette. By the way, Dante, and I know,
right.
I do know Dante as well, personally. I know his son and his wife. I know the whole family. And I sound like I'm name dropping here, but for context, what I'm trying to get to is that he was so underrated as a player to this day. He's still underrated. It's amazing to me. He was a good player.
And he's a really bright hitting guy too. Yeah. Like, he's a really sharp hitting guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was just a big personality. He came up, but he was rough around the edges, right? He wasn't a smooth fielder. He wasn't a smooth hitter for.
I don't know how athletic he was. I think Bo is a tremendous. He must. I always joke to people about this. I think Bo got his athleticism from his mom, because Dante. Yeah. I mean, Dante was an athlete, but he like you said, he was rough around the edges. He was a slugger almost.
He was a slugger. I mean, his forearms were like, he had cantaloupes in each forearm that he was smuggling. Like just a big burly kind of guy. It came up with the Brewers, and just flourished at a great career in Colorado.
Yeah. A couple of other statistics I want to pass along here. Runs per game were about 4.5, 4.7. Hits per game about 9. Home runs per game 0.95. That peaked in 1999, 1.14 per game. And again, this is in context of all the Major League games that were played that year.
Mm-hmm.
And then strikeouts per game, 6.14, which was pretty high for that time. It continued you're seeing a trend here going back to last week. It's continuing to climb. The league batting average was 239. So you mentioned that the swing started to change a little bit there in the 90s, and maybe some of it had to do with the ballparks that were being constructed. Camden Yards kind of ushered in all these new ideas for ballparks, going back to the natural grass and the infield dirt, and actually playing in a ballpark and not these cookie-cutter shithole stadiums. So did the swing start to change because of that factor, or did it start to just naturally evolve because guys now were hitting more home runs, whether that be with PEDs or not?
Yeah, I think the PEDs. I think there's always a slow change, right? So the stadiums, it would have been the 10 years after that, right? That the stadiums start to come in. So you're looking at early 2000s, right? Where the PEDs are really starting to go nuts. The late 90s, they may have been there with guys, but it wasn't as prevalent as it was, maybe 10 years later. But it started to foster that change, right? All of a sudden you see guys, back in the 80s, you have Ozzie Smith, you have Ozzie Guillen, you have, a different kind of game, right? Guys are fast. They're playing on that concrete AstroTurf. Oh, yeah. So they're just putting the ball in play. Now all of a sudden we slowly change. We get different players that we look up to, right? That are our guides. Like I said, playing wiffle ball, I was never, hey, I'm going to be, Terry Pendleton today playing wiffle ball, right? I'm going to be Griffey. I'm going to be Jones. And what do we try to do playing wiffle ball? Well, I'm not trying to hit a ground ball chopper. I'm trying to hit a ball over the house or the garage. Yeah. And so now all of a sudden these kids that are playing growing up, 10 years later, they're going to be, maybe in the minor leagues, and it starts to foster that. So I think that's where it goes. I think the Sosa McGuire, the end of the 90s fostered the steroid PED. Let's hit home runs because this is fun.
Right.
And baseball wanted to jump on that and make money, so ballparks got smaller. I think balls got a little bit harder. I think strike zones got a little bit smaller to foster that. Yeah. I think you're not going to hit in the 90s because Maddox and Glavine are getting a strike zone that's like 21 inches wide instead of 17. And I think that's, why you see a 239, league batting average probably is pitching was still on the forefront during that decade.
The 90s was a great decade, just overall, I think. Yeah. And I was young, but
the music's the best.
The music was great. The TV shows were tremendous. And look, you said last week you would love to go back to the 60s, 50s, and 60s and live. Yeah, I'd say let's go back to the 90s again. Because here's the thing, too, with baseball. It was great after the strike because there were home runs, but there weren't as many strikeouts. So the game wasn't like it is today where it's feast or famine, and it's turning, I think, fans off.
Yeah, I agree. There were dominating pitchers, but it wasn't, hey, we're going to play for a couple 2-run home runs.
Yeah.
That's what we're going for. If we get 4 hits, but we score 5 runs because we get a walk and a home run, then that's what we have to do to win. And yeah, it does make the game a little bit more boring because there's not as much action. There's a lot of quick innings. There's a lot of 1, 2, 3 innings. Yeah. And then when you get late in the game, there's really long innings because it's all about matchups, and every pitcher's throwing maybe 2 outs, they're only what's the new rule? They got to face 3 batters or something. That'll help a little bit, but You have so much happening in the back end of a game that the first 6 innings take like an hour and 20 minutes. And then all of a sudden, the end of the game takes or it takes 2 hours. And then the last part of the game takes another 2 hours.
Right. Yeah, exactly right. Let's step away from the topic for a moment here, take a break, and talk about what's going on this week with the lab. I know you've been booked with a lot of lessons, and there are some other pre-scheduled events that are going on, if I'm not mistaken. So what's going on currently at the lab?
Yeah, it's summers are great for us because it gives us so much time during the day, to work with players. So I've had a ton of last week. I think I had 5 out-of-state players come in. We had a couple players. We had a player from Alabama, a couple players from the state of Louisiana, and then people that drove as far as being out of state, but we're from Texas because it's so gigantic, that were able to drive in, and then a family from Oklahoma. So it's been great to catch up with families. Typically we do that. We get them in and we work with them for a few hours a day, and that's rewarding for us. And then we still have our summer schedule going on where we have kind of drop-in sessions during the day, around the noon hour, and then our memberships slowly filling. I think we have about maybe 10 spots left. It's been unbelievable for us the last 2 weeks. People keep signing up, and they're seeing progress and they're enjoying their time. So we're going to have to get creative and open up some weekend times because our membership evening training is starting to fill up, from 4 to 9 every night.
Yeah, so check out thelabbcs.com, see what package is good for you. Again, that's thelabbcs.com. Talking today about the History of Hitting Part 2, our History Hitting book. Thank you for joining us. Don't forget to subscribe, like the podcast. New episodes every Monday at 9 a.m. We're on social media as well, at Jim Tara, at Epstein Hitting on both Instagram and Twitter. And if you have any questions, email us, jimbopodcast21 at gmail.com. All right, let's get into the next decade, 2000 to 2010, and I think this is a little bit of a contrast from what the 90s were, where it was a little bit more of a, I don't want to say boring decade, but it wasn't as eventful, I guess. You had the Yankees and the Red Sox battling it out in the postseason, the Red Sox breaking that curse, Roger Clemens' 300th win. The Phillies won the World Series in 2008, and that sticks out to me because I was actually at that parade. But that was actually the lowest-rated television World Series, I think, of the decade, maybe in 20 or 30 years. But it was pretty low-rated on television. I don't know. It was just, I don't want to say it was a boring decade, but across the board, maybe it was a little bit flatter in terms of baseball and the entertainment value that it provided.
Yeah, it's got a black eye, right? I mean, a black eye with the PEDs. You have, you got Sosa, you got Manny Ramirez, McGuire, Palmeiro, Clemens. My goodness, A-Rod, was so dominant during that decade that, we look back at the time, it was fun. Look at these guys, they're amazing. These guys hit balls so far. They're, whatever. They stay in the lineup, all the time. They never get hurt. But it tarnished records, right?
Yeah.
That's what it comes down to is, Hank Aaron's record, fell.
Right.
And that's a bummer, maybe it would have fallen anyway. I truly think Bonds is an amazing player. And now people really don't, they just brush it off like, oh, Bonds, this and that. But he was so good. I mean, he really was. He was such a good, when he was young, he was so athletic, playing left field and still hit home runs. He just, kind of turned into a different human with his work ethic in the gym and maybe some stuff that helped him. So I definitely think it's a black eye to baseball. In the time when we were watching it, we loved it. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't remember thinking this isn't fun.
Yeah.
I loved seeing those guys. Gosh, I remember the Rangers were just insane with the guys they put out there and the home runs that they hit. They didn't really win with that team, but
that was led by Alex Rodriguez. That was led by.
But they had some dudes. So I'm trying to think. What was the year? When did Ichiro come in there?
2001.
In 2001, okay. So that was kind of a cool, here's a different guy that talk about a totally different hitter than what was going on.
Yeah.
You throw Ichiro in there, and but you're right. I was there's nothing from that decade, aside from, guys just, I'd love to hear your stats, when you throw them out there, but guys just absolutely trying to get massively huge and hit bombs left and right.
Well, before we get to those stats, just want to point out a couple of players, and you already mentioned one with Ichiro. His career was in the States was starting to take form there. Actually, his first year was 2001, and that was the year the Mariners hosted the All-Star game. And I remember they did on Fox, they did like a speed tracker type graphic of Ichiro running out of the box to first base on a ground ball that he was safe on, and I just remember the speed was out of this world, and I always strived to be that fast. I failed. Yeah, I tried. David Ortiz.
That's all you can do.
David Ortiz was coming into form. He was starting to get his legs under him. I actually knew his manager, still do, from when he was with New Britain in the Twins organization. But he was starting. Of course, the Red Sox picked him up, and he was starting to come into form as a big-time major league player. Derek Lee. That's a name you might remember. Good hitter for a period of years there. Joe Mauer, who was arguably with Kirby Puckett, maybe one of the best Minnesota Twins of all time. His career was starting to take shape. Todd Helton, we can't forget about him. He was entering his prime. And my favorite player of that decade, who I thought was just a machine, that was his nickname. I thought he could hit anything, and I thought he was the most mechanically sound hitter for about a 10 to 12-year period there. But from 2000 to 2010, 2011, before he left the Cardinals, Albert Pujols.
Yeah, forget about Pujols. That guy was fun. Mm-hmm. That guy was fun. And, talking about swings that decade, this is where hitting started to be taught. Hitting started to be broken down a little bit more. You watch ESPN, they're starting to replay swings in slow motion. You start to have guys talk about it. Now they're realizing that, swinging down to the ball really isn't happening. Guys are swinging up through the zone. How much they're swinging up through the zone. They're rotating, they're staying back behind the ball. Now it's kind of like a trend. It's linear hitting is gone.
Right.
Any sign of the White Sox in the 90s is gone. And you're starting to see, players embrace that. And now the younger generation is doing it, at the little league level, instead of, transferring weight to their front side and swinging down. Now they're staying back and they're rotating more. They're hitting balls in the air isn't frowned upon, as much as it used to be. And then times are changing to, fast forward to today when it's like, oh my gosh, we have to make sure our specs, on the hit tracks are a certain percentage, ground balls, fly balls, line drives. So yesterday I'm giving a lesson to an up and coming softball player. She's such a great kid too. I just met her. They're from New Orleans. Her name's Ava Hazard. So shout out in case you decide to listen to this on your drive home. But 14-year-old hitting balls 70 miles an hour, in the hit tracks in the softball. She's like right below some of the college players I worked with. So we're going through this girl who's very strong and probably not super fast. And I say, look at your breakdown here, when we first started. And it was like 67% ground balls. Mm-hmm. And then, split the other, whatever we have, 33% with line drives and fly balls. I'm like, we need to flip that. We need 60% line drives, 20%, ground balls, 20% fly balls. So, fast forward to her afternoon lesson, and we're looking at those numbers. I said, well, let's look at Bailey, Hemphill at Alabama. So she, I had her stuff in there when she was here over Christmas in the hit tracks. We pulled it up, and here's one of her sessions where she hit the ball, 80 miles an hour or something like that. And Ava says, Coach, look at her spray chart based on ground balls. It was like a 40 pitch set. She had 0% ground balls.
Wow.
So 0% ground balls, and she had, and again, it was just like front toss, nobody was trying to get her out. But she had like 78% line drives and then 22% fly balls.
Interesting.
Right? And she's an All-American, and she's a home run hitter, and she's big, and she's strong, and she's not fast, right? So I told Ava, I said, well, what does that say to you? I mean, she's like, well, we need to make adjustments. So anyway, we were making posture adjustments, and sure enough, we got her to hit far less ground balls and maximize her line drive power. So you start to see that starting and building in the early 2000s, right? Where guys aren't, trying to beat an infielder, so to speak. They're trying to beat an outfielder. Yeah. It's okay to hit a ball over an outfielder's head. My dad used to call them A and E line drives. Ass and elbow. So when you hit a line drive, all you see is the center fielder's ass and elbow as he's running after it. He's like, those are the kinds you want to hit. And I think that's where it started. So maybe we say to steroids, thank you for changing the way people look at hitting, because now the game is more fun.
Or maybe getting it back to where it was when Ted Williams was playing and what he was teaching your dad.
Yeah, right. Yeah. It was just a different, we took out that. We made the game more offensive. Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see the amount of runs per game this decade versus the last decade.
Mm-hmm. The ass and elbows. It's a
A&E line drives,
it's man. Big Mikeism, right? That's a big Mikeism.
That's a big Mikeism, and there's so many.
Happy Father's Day, Mike.
We can't publish.
Happy Father's Day, Mr. Epstein. Runs per game. Well, there were a variety of hitters that actually led the league in hitting, so it can't really pinpoint one guy. Alex Rodriguez actually led the league in home runs 3 times during that decade. Again, 2000 to 2010. Runs per game, though, were 4.7, so it didn't really change from the last decade.
No, it didn't. About the same.
Hits per game, 9.1. Not much of a change. Home runs per game, about 1, so it ticked up a little bit. Strikeouts per game went up also, though. You see the trend again. 6.6 per game. The overall team batting average, the league batting average, though, was 265, which was kind of interesting to me.
So 265, and what was it? 239.
It was 239 in 1990 to 2000. Jumped to 265.
That's huge.
Pretty big jump.
Right. And you can just put that on Pujols' back, because that dude hit like 330 every single year.
Well,
that decade.
I'm thinking, again, you have hitters like Ichiro, high average. Derek Lee led the league in hitting 1 year. Joe Mauer, high average, didn't hit many home runs. Todd Helton, high average. So there were a lot of guys, even Alex Rodriguez too. When he led the league in home runs, he still had a very high batting average. Derek Jeter. You had guys who really hit for high averages, maybe not as much power, with the exception of Alex Rodriguez and Todd Helton. But I think that was, and then of course Albert Pujols as well. So that could be a big reason as to why it was
pretty good.
265.
Pretty good hitters. My goodness.
Yeah. So that was that decade. So going on to 2000 to 2019, to current day. We can't do 2020, unfortunately. But some key moments. The Giants started their run, 2010, winning 3 World Series championships. I'm trying to think of more. I guess the Royals winning the World Series, that was big. First time since '85.
Yeah.
But that was a short. They had a short window, didn't they? A very short winning.
They had a couple, right? They had a couple years they made it to the playoffs. Then they won the series, and the most boring team ever, in my opinion. Wasn't it boring? It was just boring. They just had such great pitching. They were like the first team to really get into, hey, this guy's going to pitch the 7th. This guy's going to pitch the 8th. This guy's going to pitch the 9th. Remember, they had Wade Davis was just nasty, and that they had 4 guys coming out of the pen throwing hard. I don't know. If there was a corporate team, that was like a corporate team.
Well, yeah, they won in 2005 years ago. Oh my God, remember it like it was yesterday.
Yeah.
And the Nationals run, what they went on last year, I thought that's obviously, and it's very fresh in my mind, but that obviously sticks out to me. That to me was the first team, I think, that finally understood at that time, and they probably still do. They understand how to use analytics but not go overboard and still know how to scout correctly, and they combine the two rather than going one way or the other. And we saw that in the World Series last year. I think it was Game 6 when Trey Turner was positioned to the right of second. Analytically perfect, right? But analytics would tell you that you don't draft that guy in the first round out of NC State. Scouting does, though, and they certainly got that right. At least, well, actually, it was San Diego, but they got it right with him when they made the trade for him with San Diego. So that was those are the kind of the two or three moments that stick out to me in that decade. I don't know about where you stand on that, or this last decade that just passed.
Yeah, the Giants really stick out just because we know the Bochy real well, and I did work with them, some consulting work during that time, so that was fun. I was a little more vested in that team. As far as later in the decade, what sticks out? The Dodgers not winning a World Series. The Dodgers being so dominant every single year here the last 5 years and not winning a World Series it's somewhat shocking to me, but it tells you that teams have to get hot at the right time. And I'll tell you what, the Nationals, their home run, when they hit home runs and they do that little race car thing, is the greatest thing ever, because that's what it was like, man. Yeah. They put the pedal to the metal the last 3 weeks of that season, wrapping up the World Series, and they just didn't care. I mean, they were balls to the wall every single game. Yeah. The pitchers were like that. They played defense like that, and offensively they were so timely and so clutch because they had that inner confidence and they were just meshing at the right time. And I mean, that happens more years than not. But
it really stuck out last year, and I think it's because they started 19-31.
Yeah.
And I think,
and it's the Dodgers haven't finished.
Yeah.
Right. They're just cruising along, kicking everybody's butt. Yeah. And then it's like, they never had to push themselves. They never went through that difficulty during the season where it was like, hey, what are we going to do here?
Yeah.
We're in a slump. We just lost 15 out of 20 games. They never had that problem. Yeah. So all of a sudden you get into the pressure situations, and that's when that problem shows up. You don't know how to get out of it.
Yeah. And the Nationals for many years there were in that same spot where they were just cruising along. They led the NL East by 20 games, and then they lost in the division series. And I think the thing, too, that you remember from that run last year was that they swept, I think it was they swept the Phillies, was it 7 games in a row? Or something along those lines. Maybe it was 5 games in a row. But they won, I think, 7 or 8 straight, swept Cleveland going into that postseason. And you just got to feel, you said to yourself, I don't see him losing to the Brewers, your team, your organization. Right. I don't see him losing to your organization there at home, because they're just no. That's no disrespect to the Brewers, but the Nationals are hot. And then they were
so hot.
They face the Dodgers. And you're seeing, even though then they lost those games, you're seeing how they're playing, and you're like, this is not over here. It was just it was a tremendous run. It was a lot of fun last year. It really was, that postseason. I think it was absolutely tremendous.
I think I watched more baseball that postseason than I had in the last 10 years.
That's interesting.
Like, I think I watched almost every inning, like every night. Like my kids, and I have daughters, right? So like they're not huge baseball fans. But we sat down and watched and like thoroughly enjoyed those games every single night. It was so fun to have that postseason. Those games starting a little bit later when I was done working and with lessons. And, I don't know. I enjoyed it.
I wonder why that is. That's interesting. I wonder why that is.
Yeah, I don't know. That's why the MLB owners want to have the postseason, so people like me will come home and watch it. They can pay for advertising and not care about the players. But that's another subject that we can talk about. But yeah, hitting wise, all of a sudden, yes, we have scouting reports. Averages have gone in the tank, but you know what? Part of the reason averages go in the tank is because of spray charts. And now all of a sudden we have an idea where guys are hitting the ball and how hard they're hitting a ball. So you have a left-handed hitter that hits the ball 100 miles an hour off the bat up the middle for most of it. A lot of his singles, most of his singles are base hits up the middle. Well, we take that away. Now we put a fielder right up the middle. That's going to take away 30 hits from that guy during the season. And I think that plays a big part in, why averages are down. But then we have to also figure out, well, how do we compensate from that? Right now, all of a sudden I'm a left-handed power hitter. I got 3 guys on the right side of the infield. If I spray it the other way, I might get a hit, but you know what I'm not going to get is a paycheck, because my slugging percentage isn't going to be as good this year, right? So I need to drive in runs. What do I do to drive in runs? Well, I got to start hitting the ball higher and higher. In order to hit it higher and higher, all of a sudden, maybe we make swing changes. Maybe we make it the right way. Maybe we make it the wrong way. And now all of a sudden, yes, I'm still hitting my 25 home runs, but now I'm hitting, 210, 215 on the year.
Yeah.
Because of that swing change. That started because somebody put a shortstop up the middle, and now all of a sudden my batting average is 30 points less, and I got to do something so I can stay in the league.
Yeah, and the shifts were starting to become very prevalent. Analytics is really, really taking form, too. I mean, it started back, you watched the movie Moneyball in 2002, 2003 time, but this is when analytics and metrics were really starting to take shape. Some players of note, Jose Bautista was starting to become a star. Ryan Braun, Giancarlo Stanton, they were starting to enter the primes of their careers. Guys like Derek Jeter, Andrew Jones, Chipper Jones. I mean, their careers were starting to wind down and coming to an end there. So we've seen throughout the decades some new players coming in, some different type players, very good athletes come in, and some players who we grew up on during the time where baseball was peaking with popularity with the 98, 99, 2000, 2001, 2002 type era. They're starting to make their way out. Who was your favorite? Who's been, I guess, it's a new decade, but who was your favorite player of that decade? Who's been your favorite player currently, your favorite hitter?
It's a tough one. I got to go back. I got to think who, maybe 5 years ago, maybe even 9 years ago, right? Mm-hmm. Prior to 2020. Pujols probably would have to be in there. I love watching him. Mm-hmm. Mike Trout is so fun for me to watch. Not just hitting, but everything he does. I mean, the way he runs the bases. He's just. There's that old saying or quote that Joe DiMaggio late in his career. Somebody asked him, why did you run so hard and slide into second base on that double when there really wasn't a play there?
Yeah.
And he said, well, there may have been somebody in the stands. There may have been a kid in the stands who had never seen Joe DiMaggio play. And that's what I wanted him to remember.
Sure.
That's what Trout reminds me of. Like, he's in a spring training game and he's busting a 90 to first base.
Yeah. Like,
that's just the way he's geared. And you don't really see a lot of that.
No.
Unfortunately. So, I mean, you can't go wrong. Like, watching guys hit, like I'll sit down and watch Yelich hit, all the time.
Yeah.
Obviously. Pujols, I'll still sit and watch him hit and see what he's doing because he's so fun as a case study to see where he was when he first came into the league, his build, his body type, his swing, and over time as he's gotten older and less physical and not as quick and not as explosive, what he's done to try to generate a little bit more power, with his legs is what he's done. He's always had really good legs, but he's increased his weight shift and his ground force in order to try to compete at an older age, which is tough to do.
Yeah. He still is a great hitter. I don't care what anybody says. And he still has excellent bat-to-ball skills and barrel control. Some players to know, we mentioned them with Jose Bautista. He actually led the league in home runs twice during that decade. Miguel Cabrera led the league in hitting 3 times as well. Another guy who can still hit, by the way. Don't let the critics...
And looks great, by the way.
Yeah.
I think he dropped about 25 pounds.
Yeah. See, this time off, I think, will give players like him, Pujols, some older type players, some time to really heal and get themselves together to maybe have that second late surge in their careers. Unfortunately, with the circumstances, but
we don't know.
Try to make something positive out of all of this. Some statistics to pass along: runs per game at 4.38, so they've dropped. Mm-hmm. Hits per game 8.6. Home runs per game 1.07. Last year, 39 home runs. I'm sorry, 1.0. I'm reading wrong. 1.07 home runs per game. Mm-hmm. That was an all-time high, by the way, throughout. Mm-hmm. And then with the strikeouts per game, 7.8. very high. Last year, 8.81 strikeouts. Just last year alone, 2019, 8.8.
Yeah.
I was going to say 8.8 strikeouts per game throughout the league last year, most all time. So you see the trend again. You see the trend here. That I mean, oh, by the way, there were 3.9 home runs per game last year, and that was the most all time. 1.07 was not the most all time. That was the decade. Before I confuse everybody here, there were 3.9 home runs hit just under 4 a game last year in 2019. That was the most of all time. And the strikeouts per game last year, 8.81 last year, most all time. 7.8 last decade, also highest of all time as well. So I hope everybody understood that. But you're seeing where the game is now, where it's kind of feast or famine in a way.
It is, yeah, and that's what's so great about this game. And you know what? All sports are like this. There's evolution to every sport, based on what's working at that time. What is working. We gotta, as a pitcher, we gotta strike guys out. We gotta find a way to strike guys out. What are we gonna do? Well, we're gonna, use Rapsodo to figure out the spin rates and adjust those spin rates so that it doesn't look normal to everyone else. Yeah. Okay, boom. Now as a hitter, you're like, dang, these balls are moving crazy. I'm fouling off all these pitches I used to hit out. Now I need to make an adjustment. What's that adjustment? Well, we're not going to get 10 hits a game. So let's try to, when we do connect, let's hit a ball out of the park. And in doing so, we're gonna strike out a lot more. Yeah.
I wonder if where coaching has gone, are we turning, we've talked about this before, but I think it's worth going into depth more so with it now. Are we turning players into showcase players? Not you or I, but I'm saying coaches in general. Are players being turned into showcase type players where they're trying to hit that certain metric and that certain number, and it's not translating to the game, and players aren't understanding why it's not translating to the game?
Yeah, I think, at the younger age it is. Yeah. At the younger age it's we got to get to a showcase so we can get drafted or we can go to college. Yeah. And what do people want to see? Most people don't really want to see you hit 10 line drives in a row over the, into the outfield. They want to see, oh, whoa, he just hit 2 off the wall and 1 over the wall. Right. That stands out to someone or whoever's doing the prep baseball report, or the perfect game report. But I do think when people get into pro ball, I think pro ball is doing a good job of, hopefully they're doing a good job telling people this is what really works. And I think in the college level, it's like that too. Yeah. For the most part, it's like you go into the SEC and guys are throwing 95. Well, certain things work offensively and certain things don't. So you have so many players that were highly touted that fail miserably when they come out of high school and they go into pro ball and they get exposed. And then they use that great maybe ability that they had and they can make changes so they can be successful. So, it's not just about metrics. There's so many different things that come into, just seeing how hard a ball comes off a bat. I understand that that's important, and if you don't have exit velocity, then you're not going to play. It's just that simple. Like, you're not going to be successful no matter how consistent you are. But knowing, being able to take that, okay, this guy has special talent and that he's strong or she's strong and can hit the ball hard. Now, how do we maximize that God-given strength and their good mechanics to a swing play and that plays out, that becomes consistent and allows them to compete against different pitches with different movement at the highest level possible. Yeah, I agree. Well said. Well, that's the end of our hitting history book here, part 2, and just our overall history hitting book, in case you missed our first book, if you will, last week. It's available in the archives, Apple, Google, Spotify, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio. We're also now on Pandora as well. We do have a question this week. This was sent to me on my Instagram, actually, at Jim Tara. It's from AD#5. And it says, "Hi, Jim. I love the Epstein podcast. I have a question about hitting the low pitch.
Do you lunge down to get on plane with the pitch, like you're lunging with the lead leg, or do you drop the back shoulder after you stride and adjust the vertical bat angle? I'll pepper that question to you.
Yeah, no, I mean that's a pretty in-depth question. So, there's what happens and there's how you teach what happens. You don't want to, lunge. You don't want to break down that front leg unless you're fooled, and then you got to do it, right? That's totally fine. But lower pitches, you're going to have more body tilt inward, which lead inward towards the plate, which will lead to a bigger drop in your barrel, or an increased, or I guess you could call it decreased, bat vertical angle. Okay, that's the adjustment you make, is you're going to have to sink into your legs more. So as a hitter, you're taking your stride, you start to load before the ball comes out. Your foot is usually at the top of your stride when the ball is released. So as the ball's traveling to home plate and your foot is getting ready to drop, you're gathering information on that pitch, right? Your eyes are telling your brain where this pitch is going to end up. If the pitch is going to end up high in the zone, you will just drop your front foot, and you'll probably keep your posture exactly where it is and rotate around it. Hopefully keep your hands up. Your bat vertical angle will be very flat, and your attack angle will be flat. If we deem that pitch to be lower, maybe a slider working down towards our knees or a sinker down towards our knees, then when we come out of our stride, we're going to land and sink. We're going to land and get lower to the ground. Our head's going to be lower when we drop our heel. Our back, knee, and shin are going to work lower. Mm-hmm. That's going to help us get to that low pitch without having to do everything with our hands and our bat vertical angle to drop it. So you are, yes, on a low pitch, you're going to sink more. You're going to get lower to the ground with your legs. You're also going to drop your back shoulder down and in more, which will in turn drop the barrel so that you can cover that pitch at the knees. This is also why the pitch at the knees is more difficult to hit, because we have to have a steeper vertical bat angle, which makes it harder to square up balls. So when I'm teaching this, I will tell you this, I spend more time on pitches that are up and destroying those than I am pitches that are down and destroying those. And I think we talked about this in one of the episodes. If I throw you 100 pitches in BP and I throw it at the top of your thighs, you better hit like 85% of those hard, right? And of the 85%, 80% of those should be for extra bases, right? Those are mistakes. If I throw that same pitch at your knees, you're probably going to hit half of them, 50% of them for hits, and maybe a third of that half you might hit a double or a home run on. So location is, location, very important. If we spend all our time on that pitch down and away, we have to do some things that we have to drop our back shoulder more. We have to bring our posture inward more. We have to drop our bat vertical angle more to cover that pitch, which is great. But then what happens is if we take most of our training there and then we get a pitch right down the middle at our thighs and we drop our back shoulder and our bat vertical angle a little bit, then we fail on that one pitch that we got that we should have hit well. So how you train is very important. Those are the adjustments you make, though.
Yeah.
Your shoulder's going to drop, your barrel's going to drop, your body posture is going to lean in. And you're going to sink lower in the ground on low pitches. And that's why it's so important to work high pitches. It's important to work some low pitches in, out, all over the place, different speeds, because it just makes you and it teaches your brain how to react to pitches when they come out of the pitcher's hand too.
And just as a question for me, maybe a stupid question, but with bat lag, it's still the same. So if it's a low and in pitch, you're still releasing the bat from the lag position later. Vice versa on the outer half.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, that lag will still inside, outside, and it will. The further the pitch is from your center, from your, say, sternum, the more you have to reach with your arms, which makes the bat less stable and makes it harder to hit. So any pitch that's, low and away or just low is further from our center, we have to use our arms a little bit more. So, yeah, you will see that. You won't have as much lag on a pitch down because you will release that barrel a little bit early. Mm-hmm. That's why the outside pitch is the toughest, because you got to release the barrel early.
Yep.
And it's far away from you, and it's down. Mm-hmm. And we're just not going to be as strong on those pitches as we are other hittable pitches.
Yeah. That's why the pitch always got me. That pitch on the outside corner, back of the plate at the knees.
Yeah,
very hard.
And if pitchers could live there, then they wouldn't give up any runs. It's just that simple. But they do make mistakes.
The runs per game would drop even further.
Absolutely.
Well, we'll see what next decade brings with offense and hitting. We haven't gotten off to the greatest of we haven't even gotten started yet. So we'll see.
Who knows?
We'll see what that next decade does bring. Next week we'll be diving into our mechanical swing breakdown series again, part 2, and we'll be talking about and discussing, breaking down the swing of one Bryce Harper, who we've mentioned on this podcast just in passing many times. We did Christian Yelich. It's in the archives. Go back and take a look. And the video is on YouTube, so you can take a look there, but go back and take a listen, follow along. And next week we'll be breaking down Bryce Harper.
Yeah, Bryce is so dynamic and so explosive with his, and he's always been that way since he was a young kid. That I'm looking forward to diving a little bit more into what he does at the plate and some different changes he's made throughout the years.
Any questions for us, be sure to email those along or on social media at Jim Tara, at Epstein Hitting, JimboPodcast21 at gmail.com, JimboPodcast21 at gmail.com. Happy Father's Day, Jake, Mike Epstein, everybody out there. We appreciate you listening, and we will talk to you next week.